All right, welcome back, my young navigators, to today's Explainer. Today, we are acting as junior crew members and uncovering the epic ocean survival tales of a true global explorer. I am so thrilled to be your guide on this journey. We aren't just looking at dusty history today, we're literally stepping aboard ancient rafts, braving the open ocean, and learning what it takes to survive when the whole world doubts you. We're looking at the life and the incredible voyages of Thor Heyerdahl, a man who refused to believe that the vast oceans were barriers, but rather saw them as massive highways connecting ancient civilizations. Here's our flight path, or, well, our sailing route for today. 1. A young explorer's curiosity. 2. Faith, honesty, and rafts. 3. 7 nations, 1 crew. 4. Protecting our world oceans. 5. Explorer, true or false. And finally, 6. The Great Explorer Match. Let's get right into it. Section 1. A young explorer's curiosity. The boy from Norway. So I want you to imagine the salt spray on your face. But wait, before we hit the open ocean, our story actually begins way back in a childhood home in Larvik, Norway, in 1914. Long before he was this world-famous adventurer, Thor Heyerdahl was honestly just a young kid with a massive, boundless fascination for the natural world. He started out with an intense passion for zoology. And hey, for those taking notes, zoology is basically the scientific study of the behavior, structure, physiology, classification, and distribution of animals. He ended up studying this super heavily at the University of Oslo, and it was this exact scientific foundation that led him to question, well, pretty much everything. He really wanted to know, how in the world did certain animals and even plants, like the South American sweet potato, find their way to these incredibly isolated islands right in the middle of the Pacific? But his love for science started way before university. He actually went ahead and created a small museum right inside his childhood home. Talk about proving that curiosity starts young, right? And he didn't just collect, your standard boring rocks and leaves. He wanted his museum to be a complete showstopper. And this brilliantly illustrates just how daring he was from the get-go. His main attraction? A vipera berris. For those of us who don't speak Latin, a vipera berris is literally a venomous viper. I mean, making a highly venomous snake the main attraction of your childhood bedroom museum? That is quite the bold move for a young boy. Wouldn't you agree? It perfectly foreshadowed the totally fearless explorer he was going to become. Moving on to Section 2. Faith, honesty, and rafts. Building the impossible. Okay, just imagine the crisp snap of dry papyrus and the sheer exhausting physical effort it took to lash these massive bundles of reeds together. This is the construction of the Ar, a boat literally named after the Egyptian sun god. Heyerdahl actually brought together these incredible boat builders all the way from Lake Chad in Africa, guys who were absolute experts in making papyrus boats that they called kadais, and had them work right in the shadow of the Great Pyramids of Egypt. I mean, what a scene! They had to cut and dry these triangular reeds out in the blazing sun, peel and twist the tough skin to form ropes, and then literally tie these huge tapered bundles together using just their hands, their teeth, and their bare feet. But as you might guess, during construction, we get a pretty amazing life lesson about respecting the honest craftsman and trusting diverse skills. See, an old Arab boat builder from Port Said was brought in to handle the masts and rigging, but he was completely outraged by the papyrus. He called it a flimsy paper boat that couldn't even hold a single nail. Meanwhile, the builders from Lake Chad thought the Arab builder was frankly ignorant simply because he'd never seen a real reed vessel before. So Heyerdahl had to play peacemaker. He had to navigate this massive clash of egos and cultures, realizing that modern men had kind of lost the ancient knowledge of how these distinct, diverse parts were actually supposed to work together. And you know what? Even Heyerdahl himself admitted this sort of proverb-like lesson about having no particular faith in the reeds at first. He actually wrote that we usually think of straw as exceptionally fragile. Something you figuratively grasp at when all else has completely failed, right? Not exactly the material you willingly choose to sail across the entire Atlantic Ocean on, but he did it anyway. And this teaches us a really profound lesson. Sometimes making a massive discovery requires stepping right onto fragile ground, or in this case, fragile water, when literally all modern logic is screaming at you not to. Now look at this. What's really fascinating here is the stark contrast in the ancient engineering he tested out throughout his life. Years earlier, back in 1947, Heyerdahl sailed the famous Kon-Tiki. Now, that raft was built using heavy, solid balsa-wood logs harvested straight from the jungles of Ecuador, and that was to prove South Americans could have reached Polynesia. But for his next massive voyages, the RA and the RA2, he totally switched gears to the seemingly fragile sun-dried papyrus reeds from Ethiopia to prove ancient Mediterranean cultures could have reached the Americas. Two vastly different materials, but driven by one identical, unquenchable thirst for discovery. All right, Section 3, 7 nations, 1 crew, unity on the open ocean. Stepping aboard the Ara wasn't just some crazy physical or engineering experiment. It was actually a profoundly deep human experiment. Heyerdahl purposefully assembled a crew of 7 men from 7 completely different nations. We're talking Norman Baker from the United States, Carlo Mori from Italy, Yuri Sienkiewicz from the Soviet Union, Santiago Genovez from Mexico, Abdullah Jabrin from Chad, George Suriel from Egypt, and of course, Thor Heyerdahl from Norway. He very deliberately chose men representing totally diverse races, religions, and political views. Why? To demonstrate that humanity can absolutely cooperate effectively, even under the extreme, totally terrifying stress of ocean survival. So, the really crucial takeaway here is that this tiny, fragile, floating island of papyrus became a literal symbol of world peace, flying the flags of all these different nations. And keep in mind, guys, this was 1969. Back on land, the United States and the Soviet Union were totally locked in the bitter, dangerous tensions of the Cold War. Yet here, out on a bundle of reeds in the middle of nowhere, an American and a Russian were working side by side, day in and day out, just to keep their crew alive. It's incredible. And this brings us to a really beautiful proverb from Heyerdahl himself. He once said, "Borders, I have never seen one, but I have heard they exist in the minds of some people." Wow, that is a life lesson for all of us, reminding us that the borders dividing us, whether they're geographic, cultural, or political, are honestly often just illusions constructed in our own minds. When you're out there on the open ocean, battling the elements, every single one of those borders completely vanishes. Section 4. Protecting Our World Oceans, a Legacy of Conservation. Beyond just proving ancient history and demonstrating world peace, our intrepid crew actually made a chilling, very modern discovery. The pristine Atlantic Ocean was sick. During that first RA voyage in 1969, the crew made the incredibly grim discovery of black oil clumps, just floating right there on the surface of the mid-Atlantic. They were completely horrified. So what did they do? They reported their findings straight to the United Nations. Because of this, on the next journey, the RA2 in 1970, the UN Secretary General explicitly asked Heyerdahl to make daily observations of oceanic pollution. And guess what? They found oil clumps on 43 of their 57 days at sea. That's staggering. Heyerdahl presented these reports to the UN, which directly resulted in a monumental 1972 international ban on dumping waste oil in open seas. So his exploration literally helps save our oceans. Section 5. Explorer True or False. Test your knowledge. Listen closely, my young navigators, because it is time to test your active recall with a fast-paced true or false classroom quiz. Let's see how closely you've been paying attention to our Explorer's Log so far. Here's your first question. True or false? Thor Heyerdahl created a small museum in his childhood home with a venomous viper as the main attraction. Go ahead, shout out your answers. Well, if you remembered our early lesson on his crazy passion for zoology, you know this daring childhood fact is absolutely true. Okay, question 2, true or false? The first boat, named RA, was constructed entirely out of heavy balsa wood logs. Think about it, shout it out. And this one is false. The RA was masterfully built using those sun-dried papyrus reeds by the incredibly skilled builders from Lake Chad. It was actually the Kon-Tiki that was built from the heavy balsa wood logs. Really great job if you caught that distinction. Section 6, the Great Explorers Match. Identify the navigators. All right, you survived the quiz, but now we enter our final challenge, a rapid-fire matching game using historical portraits drawn straight from the Heyerdahl lesson archives. Examine the visual clues on these 2 legendary figures. Can you identify these famous explorers who literally changed the map of the world long before Heyerdahl's time? Take a really close look at the clothing, the hats, the intense expressions of these hardened navigators. These are the faces of the European explorers whose later voyages would completely and totally reshape the global narrative. And how about these 2?
Just look at the totally diverse gear here. You've got one wrapped heavily against the freezing cold, the other in a much more traditional historic collar. It's the historical journeys across the seas by bold men like these that directly inspired the modern diffusionist theories we explored today. You know, that whole idea that ancient peoples weren't just isolated in their own little bubbles, but actively traveled and shared their incredible cultures across vast, dangerous waters.
And finally, taking a look at our last portrait here. Whether you guessed all of them correctly or not, the specific names are honestly way less important than what these faces actually represent. They represent the exact same burning, unstoppable curiosity that led a young boy from Norway, who started out with a venomous snake in his bedroom, to eventually cross the towering, terrifying waves of the Atlantic Ocean on a fragile bundle of reeds. So, as we close out today's explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought. The ocean is vast, and the world is always, always waiting for new discoveries. Just as the RA crew proved that entirely diverse nations can survive together, and just as their voyage actively helped protect our oceans from pollution, you too have a massive journey ahead. So, my young navigators, what imaginary borders will you tear down in your own life? What impossible rafts are you going to build? Stay curious, keep exploring, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.